Hey, Lake Point, Pastor Mike here to get you caught up on the 5th week of our series, Thriving in Babylon. Over the past 300 years, and especially over the past 3 decades, Canadian culture has dramatically changed. It's shifted from a Christianized culture, shaped by a Judeo-Christian worldview, to a post-Christian culture, a modern-day Babylon of sorts, where the values of our dominant society run alien, sometimes even hostile, to the way of Jesus. And so, the book of Daniel is acting as our guide, mentoring us on how to navigate this new terrain. This week, we picked up the story in chapter 5. King Nebuchadnezzar, the big bad from the last few chapters, is no longer on the scene. There's a new king in town, and his name is Belshazzar. At this point in time, Daniel is 80 years old. He has spent 6 decades of his life living in Babylon. He served under King Nebuchadnezzar for 43 years. And what you need to know is that after Nebuchadnezzar's reign, things in the Babylonian Empire progressively got worse. And by the time Belshazzar steps in, things are on the brink of collapse. So much so that at the outset of the story, we're told there's an army camped outside the city. However, Belshazzar isn't preparing his troops for war. He's sitting there drinking the night away at a lavish, self-indulgent party that he threw for himself. And in Daniel chapter 5, verse 2, we read that Belshazzar gave orders to bring in the gold and silver cups that his predecessor Nebuchadnezzar had taken from the temple in Jerusalem. Why does that matter? Well, it was a deeply sacrilegious act. The gold and silver cups had been plundered from the temple in Jerusalem 65 years earlier, and they'd been kept in storage. And now, in a drunken stupor, Belshazzar takes something meant to honor the one true God, and instead he uses it to indulge himself and toast to the Babylonian gods. It's an incredibly disrespectful and self-gratifying act, and so unsurprisingly, just as this mockery is taking place, God decides to act. And we're told that suddenly the fingers of a human hand appeared and wrote on the wall. And when Belshazzar sees this, he's just filled with total fear. And so in a panic, Belshazzar summons all the enchanters, astrologers, and fortune tellers, and he tells them this, that whoever can read this writing and tell me what it means will be dressed in purple robes of royal honor and will have a gold chain placed around his neck, and he will become the 3rd highest ruler in the kingdom. And so the wise men, they come, and none of them are able to read the writing or tell Belshazzar what it means, and so he starts to panic more and more until eventually the queen mother, most likely his mom or his grandmother, come in and they tell him about this man named Daniel. She tells him that Daniel has insight, understanding, and wisdom like that of the gods. And so they call for Daniel to come, and Belshazzar makes him the same promise he made all the other wise men. And I love Daniel's response. Belshazzar offers him a bunch of money, power, and prestige, and Daniel simply says, "You may keep your gifts for yourself and give your rewards to someone else. Nevertheless, though, I'll read the writing for the king, and I'll tell you what it means." And from there, Daniel just goes, gives Belshazzar a history lesson. He tells him all about how Nebuchadnezzar had gone off the rails. He tells him how his grandfather, King Nebi, had totally lost his mind. He started living like a cow. He traded the palace for a pasture. And when Daniel finishes his history lesson, he then says this to Belshazzar. He says, "You are his successor, O Belshazzar, and you knew all this, yet you have not humbled yourself." And so God has sent this hand to write the message. And this is the message that was written, Mene, Mene, Tekel, Parsin. And here's what it means. Mene means numbered. God has numbered the days of your reign and has brought it to an end. Tekel means weighed, and you have been weighed on the balances and have not measured up. Parsin means divided. Your kingdom has been divided and given to the Medes and to the Persians. And that is precisely what history records. That very night, Babylon would fall to the Medo-Persian army. And what's more, that very night, Belshazzar would be killed. It's a crazy story, right? Now, what's interesting is that this story offers us valuable insight into the sort of reputation we're meant to live with, the reputation we need to carry if we want to influence the culture around us, just like Daniel. And the first thing we need to do is decide on consistency. And what I mean by that is we need to consistently choose to do the right thing. And we need to keep doing the right thing even when we get the wrong results. Here's the thing, when we read stories like Daniel, it's easy to forget we're getting the highlights of his life explained in rapid succession over just a few short chapters. But what I don't want you to fail to appreciate is the time that passes between those highlights. I don't want you to fail to appreciate the long seasons of consistent living that made it possible for Daniel to be remembered and used when the time came. A lifetime of consistency sets you up for meaningful moments, but between chapters 4 and 5 of Daniel, there's roughly a 40-year gap. Yet the character and the consistency he lived with made a way for him to influence during a time of crisis. Consistency matters. Keep doing the right thing, keep living wisely, because people will notice. The second thing, always be learning. Learning is not a stage of life, learning is your life. I truly believe God wants you to learn something new every day about this world, about other people, about Him. One of the saddest things I see in the church is Christians who stop learning. We think because we've read the stories or memorized the Bible verses or heard enough sermons that God doesn't have anything more to stretch us or teach us or really challenge us with. And that couldn't be further from the truth. If you want to have influence, you need to be curious and you need to always be learning. And don't think this is all about reading books, although I do encourage you to do that. The truth is you can learn from anybody. How? By asking questions. And don't be afraid of looking stupid. Pride says, I don't want to ask questions. Humility says, I can learn from anybody, even my critics. In my experience, Christians sometimes get a bad rap for being opposed to education or opposed to science or opposed to logic. I've even heard people claim that the more university degrees you accumulate, the less likely you are to follow Jesus. However, just so you know, statistically speaking, if you have a master's degree or better, you're far less likely to walk away from your faith than someone who is less educated. Turns out there's reason and logic behind following Jesus, not just feelings. Jim Davis, a man who has extensively researched people who are leaving the church and why they're leaving, revealed that data shows less than 3% of highly educated people ever walk away from their faith. Now, most of us don't have a master's degree, but the point is simply this: don't ever buy the lie that faith is for dumb people. And if you're passionate about learning, don't feel like you're gonna outgrow God. If we want to influence our culture, we need men and women who are committed to deep thinking and who are able to use their degrees to get a seat at the tables the rest of us are probably not getting invited to. Third thing, never avoid truth. Don't shy away from honesty, even when it's uncomfortable. People in our lives need us to speak more truthfully more often, especially when the writing is on the wall for where the decisions they're making are going to lead. Daniel could have folded like all the other wise men. He could have told Belshazzar, look, sorry, I have no idea what it says, but instead, he uses the opportunity to give a history lesson and then delivers difficult news. He doesn't avoid truth, he speaks it honestly. And here's the reality: you don't win people to the truth with lies. Avoiding awkward conversations because they're awkward isn't a Christ-like way to live. If you want to influence our culture, we need to speak the truth. It needs to be thoroughly soaked in love and grace, but it still needs to be spoken. Fourth thing, initiate new patterns. And what this is all about is learning from prior generations. It's about refusing to repeat family sin patterns. And this was the mistake that King Belshazzar had made. He could have learned from Nebuchadnezzar, but he seems to not have wanted to. It's why we need to be students of history, not just world history, but actually family history. The more you understand what happened in the past, the more you're going to be equipped to not repeat its mistakes. Fifth thing, evaluate success differently. Daniel was offered the rewards of Belshazzar's kingdom, but clearly Daniel was more focused on the rewards of God's kingdom. As followers of Jesus, our metric for success is not prosperity and possessions, it's faithfulness and fruitfulness. In Christianity, winning often feels like losing. What I mean is that when someone slanders you and spreads false things about you and you refuse to do the same thing in return, it sure feels like losing. When you have an opportunity to get ahead in business, but it requires you to compromise your integrity and so you choose not to, but other coworkers go for it, it sure feels like losing. When you choose to save yourself from marriage, or if you're already married, to stay within the confines and commitments of that marriage, it may feel like you're missing out, like you're losing in a way, but on God's scorecard, you're winning. And if we want to have an impact and influence on our culture, it requires more Christians pursuing the rewards of God's kingdom instead of the rewards of Babylon's kingdom. It requires more Christians choosing to win by God's standards instead of the world's standards. Finally, if we want to influence culture, we need to live in humility. We need to maintain a humble attitude that honors our God. And the scriptures tell us that pride goes before a fall. The story of Belshazzar reinforces that reality. Humility begins by recognizing that you're not God. And just a heads up, humility is something we do, it's not something we feel. Biblical humility, it's a posture, it's an attitude, it's a perspective on life. Humility is lived out, it's acted out, it's not a feeling. And Daniel consistently modeled humility, and we should as well. Well, friends, thanks for listening. Enjoy jumping into discussion questions. I'll see you next time.